Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 42. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And so, to our guest for this episode.
My name's Laura Malpass. I have lived and worked in Northamptonshire for 30 years, more than that now. I was drawn to this particular object because this particular object unlocks the story of the dissolution of the monasteries in Northamptonshire.
I love the fact that you just used the word unlocked, because the object is what?
It's an iron key. It's a very functional looking object. It's probably about 7-8 inches long. I don't know much about keys, but it's got 3 sticky outy bits that help turn the lock. There's no decoration. It's a purely functional key. And we know that this key was surrendered to the agents of Thomas Cromwell on the 2nd of March in 1538, because Richard Leighton, who worked for Thomas Cromwell and also for King Henry VIII, was the man who dissolved the monastery, St Andrews Priory in Northampton.
What do we know about the priory itself, given that this is a key to it?
It's probably the oldest priory in Northampton. It was in the northwest corner of the old walled town. It was built by Simon de Senlis, who I think built lots of wonderful places around the town and around the area. But he established a monastery there just after the conquest. And it was a Cluniac monastery, which was of French origin. But the Cluniacs did really quite well in Northampton. For Delaprey Abbey, for example, was the Cluniac nunnery. And there are others places around the county.
Do we happen to know whether this key was literally the key to the priory, or was it simply a key that was found and had an association with the priory?
Well, the key looks quite simple. So I can't imagine it was the only key, but we do know that the keys were surrendered for the dissolution. And one of the great things about anything to do with the church of this period is that things were recorded, written down, listed, noted. And we do have quite a lot of those records still existing, and we know that keys were handed over.
What sort of history of Northamptonshire would the priory have borne witness to?
Vast amounts, because we had all of the royal visitations and the royal happenings that happened in the county. So it's not too far from Northampton Castle, and we know that there were great dramas there. We had Bad King John doing all sorts of things. We had Thomas a Becket having dramas there, and of course the priory would have been closely involved with all of that sort of action. And they would have provided accommodation and venues for all of the meetings of the great and the good who came to Northampton.
You mentioned the Cluniacs. Where do the Cluniacs come into this?
Closely followed by the Norman invasion of England was the Norman invasion of the church, the French church, because Simon de Senlis was one of the barons that helped William with his conquest, and I think it's not too great a reach to imagine that he brings the people that he knows from his home country to set up a religious establishment. Closely followed, it has to be said, by we have Franciscans in town, Augustinians, we have Benedictines in town, we have Knights Templar, we have Knights Hospitaller, which is hard to say, all sorts of different monastic establishments and organisations.
This is massive diversity.
Oh, it really was. And I was just counting up the number of religious establishments there were in Northamptonshire, and I've come up with 34 separate monastic establishments in the county that are really spread across the whole county. Nobody would have been more than 5 or 6 miles away from some religious establishment or other.
So with that religious diversity then, what does it say about the society of Northamptonshire? How has that diversity of religion shaped the county from places like this priory, which was sited in one of the walls of Northampton when Northampton was a walled town?
I don't think that the people like us would have had very much to say about whether or not these various religious orders could come and set up shop. It was very much above our pay grade. Land was granted to by wealthy people to monastic establishments so that they would have masses said for their souls. They'd have probably welcomed the employment, to be honest. For every one religious person in a monastery, you could expect them to be supported by maybe 4 or 5 other people who helped them, who were employed in order to feed them, wash their clothes, till the fields, look after the stock. So they were a great source of employment.
So the existence of places like St Andrews Priory were as much to do with high-end patronage as much as anything else then?
Very much so. It was the aristocracy of the church. The aristocracy of the king's friends, the king's court, the king's nobles, they had the land and they were able to gift this land to the people that they wanted to support them. It's very, very political.
And is that why Northamptonshire has the nickname of being the county of spires and squires then?
I think it probably may well. And we do know that there's a lot of big country estates in the county. What's really interesting is that when you look through the list of religious establishments from the 16th century, which of course was the era of the dissolution, we recognise those names now not as monastic establishments but as stately homes. You know, there's barely a stately home there that doesn't have somewhere underneath it a religious establishment.
Laura, this key is what has prompted our conversation. Concerning dissolution,
yes.
How did dissolution come about? What was the effect of dissolution? And indeed, what did dissolution do to Northamptonshire if it was this welcoming or patronising county for the religious classes, for the religious groups? What did dissolution do to all of that?
Religion was a massive, major part of everybody's life. It dominated people's lives. When Henry VIII had his big love triangle, Anne Boleyn, Catherine of Aragon, all of that, I think the church was in a bit of a mess. And I think the Crown looked at the church and thought, there's a lot of control and power that is within the church that shouldn't really be there, because it was so dominant in society. So I think Henry VIII, when he decided, with his advice from Thomas Wolsey, with his advice from Thomas Cromwell, they could see that the church needed reforming anyway. And when Henry decided that the only way he could get his divorce was to actually become head of the Church of England, one of the first things he did was, like we had the Domesday Book when William came, he instigated something called the Valor Ecclesiasticus, which is basically a Domesday Book of everything that the church owned, all the property, and I think they were really, really shocked when they worked out how much was owned by the church and how much every single place that provided money to the church was listed in the Valor. And it was pretty soon after that a lot of the monasteries, the smaller monasteries, started to be closed. And it was quite brutal what happened.
So with dissolution, therefore,
yes,
perhaps the power of religion took a step back.
Absolutely.
The wealth of religion took a step back. This key echoes an era when religion would have been up there with monarchy. With the dissolution of that, what does that say about Northamptonshire? Did the county take a step back, or did it take a step forward from your point of view as a historian?
It took a step forward, because suddenly we found that if you look at our wonderful Elizabethan houses that we have in the county, we look at Thomas Tresham, we look at Christopher Hatton. So we've got a Lyveden New Bield. We've got some of the most beautiful buildings emerged during the post-Reformation period, because now the money and the power is in the hands of the laity, the aristocracy.
In which case, and to bring this to a close, it sounds like a terribly trite phrase, but the actions of Henry VIII in dissolution were key to where society now sits. And here we have a key which echoes what came before dissolution,
Yes.
when all of that was locked away from the laity.
It is a perfect analogy for what happened in the middle of the 16th century.
Laura, it's been a pleasure to talk to you and a pleasure to listen to your storytelling and indeed to the documenting of that particular history of Northamptonshire. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.